Trump wanted to arrive at the China summit from a position of strength. The idea was simple. He wanted to put a scorecard on the table and tell Beijing that Washington had pressured Venezuela, weakened Iran, restored American power, and now China had to negotiate on U.S. terms. That plan is starting to look much weaker. The Iran war is now more than 70 days old, and it is no longer just a military or diplomatic problem. It is draining U.S. money, weapons, and political capital. More importantly, it is changing Trump's bargaining position before he even sits down with Xi. Trump has already called Iran's response totally unacceptable. He is threatening a much bigger escalation and says the ceasefire is now on life support. He also says Iranians will be laughing no longer. That sounds tough. The problem is that major strikes before the China summit could create even more pressure on the U.S. economy and anger Beijing at the worst possible moment. China is already exposed to the disruption of Middle Eastern oil supply. Prices are rising, and Chinese investments in the region are at risk. That gives Iran a direct way to complicate Trump's China strategy. Tehran understands that it can pressure Washington without touching America directly. It can worsen the oil crisis, push global prices higher, and let the damage move through the U.S. economy. Oil is a global market. If global prices rise, energy prices inside the United States rise too. There is nowhere for Washington to hide from that. World oil buffers are being drawn down heavily, and if the war continues without a resolution, the world may have only around 4 months before critical reserve levels are reached. On paper, there may be more than 8 billion barrels in global reserves. In practice, only part of that can be drawn down safely. That is why Trump's first answer is to release oil from U.S. reserves. It sounds simple. The hidden problem is that those barrels do not move straight from the government to American drivers. Around 170 million barrels are being drained over a few months. If prices keep rising, he may need to release even more just to keep the market calm. On the surface, this sounds like a direct solution. More barrels enter the market, supply improves, and prices should ease. The real process is more complicated. When the United States releases oil from its reserves, those barrels are usually sold through auctions. The Department of Energy issues a notice of sale, buyers come in, and the barrels go to whoever wins the bid. That means the oil does not move directly from the U.S. government to American drivers. It also does not automatically go to friendly countries that need relief. It enters the market and major players compete for it. This is where the problem begins. Some of the biggest buyers are not governments. They are trading companies. Shell's trading division bought around 80 million barrels. Trafigura bought more than 21 million barrels. Other major buyers included Gunvor and Macquarie. These are some of the biggest trading houses in the world. They have storage, shipping networks, financing, market access, and the scale to move enormous volumes of oil. They also understand timing. If they can buy barrels at one price, hold them, and sell them later at a higher price, they have a strong reason to do it. Trading houses are not charities. Their job is to make money. This is arbitrage, buying low and selling high. In a normal market, that is business. In an oil shock, it can limit the relief that consumers actually feel. So even if Trump releases more reserves, prices may not fall the way the White House hopes. If global oil buffers keep shrinking, traders can absorb those barrels, manage their positions, and wait for better prices. The physical price of oil can still move higher. That leaves the United States with a painful problem. Releasing reserves may look strong politically, while the benefit gets captured inside the market. And once oil prices stay elevated, the damage quickly spreads into inflation, interest rates, household budgets, and the stock market. Americans are already feeling it at the pump. Since the Iran war began, gasoline has jumped by $1.54 per gallon, and prices are rising across every state. The national average is now around $4.50 per gallon. That is a 51% increase compared with pre-war levels. In California, some drivers may be paying more than $7 for the same gallon. This is where the war becomes personal for ordinary Americans. It reaches people before they even get to work. Every commute becomes more expensive. Every school run costs more. Every delivery, every trip to the grocery store, every visit to family becomes part of the same pressure. Millions of Americans feel the hit the moment they start the car. This is becoming a tax on everyday life. Higher energy prices feed into the entire U.S. economy. They raise transport costs, they push up the price of goods, and they add new pressure to inflation. And now, the inflation data is confirming that pressure. For the first time in 3 years, Americans' wages are no longer outpacing inflation. In April, prices rose 0.6% on a monthly basis, pushing the annual inflation rate to 3.8%, the highest level since May 2023. Rising energy prices from Trump's war accounted for 40% of April's monthly inflation gain. If inflation pressure returns, the Federal Reserve is forced to keep rates high. That hurts the stock market, keeps mortgage rates elevated, and adds more strain to a financial system that is already vulnerable. The consumer side is just as important. According to Goldman, U.S. consumers will have less money to spend. Before the war, consumer disposable income was expected to grow by 5.1%. Now that figure has fallen to just 3.7%. That is a major downgrade for an economy that still depends heavily on household spending. The bottom quintile is getting hit hardest. For the poorest households, disposable income growth is almost flat. That matters because food and gas already make up a large share of their monthly spending. When both categories become more expensive, there is less money left for everything else. That means fewer restaurant visits, fewer vacations, fewer electronics purchases, fewer subscriptions, and less demand for cars and other big-ticket items. The damage then moves from households into corporate earnings. Companies sell less, margins get squeezed, and hiring can slow. But Trump's team is still talking as if the economy is ready for a major boom. The claim is that new factories, new infrastructure, and heavy business investment will push growth much higher once everything comes online.
What kind of GDP growth number would you expect for the U.S. economy?
I think we really could be looking at numbers north of 4, north of 5, north of even 6, because there's so much capital stock growth right now. Remember that the 2% number that you saw for GDP growth, the reason why it was 2% and not 4 or 5% was that we imported a record number of capital goods because we're building all these factories. Once we turn those factories on, you're going to see really growth unlike anything we've seen before.
A 6% GDP growth forecast is extremely aggressive. Even China does not openly forecast growth above 5%. The last time the United States reached 6% GDP growth was in 1984. So when Kevin Hassett talks about growth north of 4%, north of 5%, and even north of 6%, it starts to sound like a fantasy. His argument depends on a capital investment boom. Companies are building factories. They are importing capital goods. They are spending on equipment, structures, and new capacity. The idea is that once those factories start operating, the economy will suddenly produce much faster growth. The problem is that this entire story depends on financial conditions. Companies need access to affordable credit. Factories, infrastructure, equipment, and capital goods are often tied to debt and financing costs. If oil prices keep rising and inflation pressure returns, interest rates stay higher for longer. That makes investment more expensive. It also weakens consumers. If households are spending more on gas, food, rent, and utilities, they have less money left for the products those new factories are supposed to sell. So the same oil shock can hit business investment and consumer demand at the same time. Iran dragging out the war complicates the entire growth story. Tehran effectively has a lever on U.S. inflation. If the oil crisis worsens, Hassett's 6% growth claim starts looking less like a forecast and more like a political sales pitch. And that is the economic backdrop Trump carries into Beijing. Trump is now heading to China under very difficult conditions. He needs a win from the summit, and he is bringing a major business delegation with him. Nvidia, Citibank, and Blackstone are expected to attend. Apple and Tesla are also part of the group. Apple wants to sell more iPhones. Tesla wants to sell more EVs. That alone says a lot about the real balance of power. Major American companies still need access to the Chinese market. So Trump is not walking into Beijing with strong leverage. He is walking in with negative leverage. Washington wants something from Xi. It wants China to buy more U.S. energy. It wants China to buy more American food exports, especially soybeans. It also wants China to buy Boeing airplanes. This is the same playbook Washington has used before, only now the need for a political win is much greater. For months, many experts argued that China would be trapped by its dependence on Middle Eastern energy. They said the oil shock would expose Beijing's weakness. Now, even mainstream media is starting to admit that China's energy system was built to handle this kind of crisis. CNN called it China's energy fortress, and the phrase fits the situation. China has a diversified energy base. It has nuclear power, solar power, hydrothermal power, and other domestic generation sources. Even if Middle Eastern oil imports crash to zero, China's lights still turn on and factories continue operating. Oil products may become more expensive, but the wider economy is much better insulated than many Western analysts expected. China also has much larger crude reserves than the United States. Beijing has roughly 1.4 billion barrels of crude in reserves, equal to around 90 days of oil consumption. The United States has around 430 million barrels, equal to around 21 days of consumption. America is a major oil producer, which gives it some protection. China also has Russia to the north as a fallback source. That makes Middle Eastern oil disruption a weak pressure point against Beijing. China's position is not only defensive, Beijing also has pressure points of its own, and some of them reach deep into the American economy. The first is rare earths. If Beijing shuts off rare earth exports, it can hit U.S. weapons production and AI chip supply chains. These materials are tied to defense systems, advanced manufacturing, and strategic technology. Trump cannot afford a major rare earth shock during a war and right before a China summit. The second pressure point is soybeans. If China reverses course on buying U.S. soybeans, American farmers suffer quickly. This becomes even worse during a fertilizer crisis. Losing Chinese demand would damage farm incomes and create political pressure in rural states. Many of those farmers supported Trump, and a major hit to their income could turn them against his party. Then there is the bigger industrial picture. China's industrial policy is working so well that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is now warning about G7 losses. A new report says China could threaten up to $650 billion in industrial exports from G7 economies. That equals around 12% of total G7 manufacturing value by 2030. So the longer the Iran war lasts, the harder it becomes for Washington to correct course. Trump enters the summit with higher oil prices, weaker consumer confidence, rising inflation pressure, vulnerable farmers, nervous corporations, and a delegation that still needs Chinese markets. Meanwhile, Beijing does not need to rush. It can wait while Washington needs a result. If Iran keeps the oil crisis alive, every week before the summit becomes more expensive for Washington. Gas prices can rise further, inflation pressure can build, and American companies can become even more desperate to protect their access to China. So what can Trump realistically get from Xi if China believes Washington needs the deal more? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like and share the video. See you in the next one.